How many times have you regretted something you did? Have you ever lost someone and regretted something you didn't do? When we live our lives intentionally, we will have no regrets when death happens. Let me tell you a story. When I was about 9, I developed this habit of imagining people very close to me dying before I fell asleep. Never how they died, don't get the wrong idea, but how I would feel if someone I loved passed away and what that would mean. So imagine a 9-year-old lying awake at night, trying to picture a life without her parents, her siblings, her close friends. What would it feel like if my mom permanently disappeared? What does it mean when someone dies? How will I die, and will I feel ready when that time comes? Most of us have asked ourselves these kinds of questions. As I grew older, I started to wonder why this was a place my mind went to, and whether it was normal to think about mortality. So naturally, I began asking my friends about death, and I can tell you right now, it's a real conversation killer. I soon realized 2 things. First, no, it was definitely not normal to imagine people you care about no longer living. And second, not many people, young ones especially, particularly like thinking or talking about death. And that makes sense. Most people are fairly reticent when it comes to relating their unique individual experiences to an endless, undifferentiated, unconscious abyss. There's a line in a poem about death that has always stuck with me. It's by Philip Larkin, and it goes like this. Most things may never happen. This one will, and realization of it rages out. Everyone must confront death, must make sense of something seemingly nonsensical, must accept the unacceptable. We all ask ourselves what it means to die, and we all synthesize the experiences with and the hopes and stories we have about death in our own way. But we don't often ask each other these questions. We live in a highly individualized society, and as a result, death in the United States is often an individualized experience. What I learned through thinking about mortality from such a young age, though, is that the end of life can be more than a source of despair and anxiety. When I was younger, I used to think about it in very dualistic terms. I thought about it as life and death, with not much possibility for overlap or complexity. With age comes wisdom, but with intentional reflection comes deeper understanding and growth. We've all interacted with death in some way, and what I want to explore today is what happens when we become more aware of how we interact with it, and more critical of that relationship. To that end, I've devised 3 strategies that have helped me reimagine what it means to die, and I invite you to do the same. What would happen if we reimagined death? I want to start with a poem that has helped me get more comfortable with the idea of dying. It's by a woman named Mary Fry, and it goes like this. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry, I am not there. I did not die. When I think about death, I imagine it to look something like this. Having grown up on a farm, I was always surrounded by these kinds of natural images, so the idea of becoming one with the earth appeals to me and resonates with what I've experienced. How do you understand mortality? What stories and concepts do you use to conceptualize it? The first, most basic step toward reimagining death is to define it, so it can become more than that dualistic division between life and death, if it isn't already. Basically, this first step is to make death part of your mental vernacular, so it doesn't feel like a weird thing to be thinking about. Make it accessible. The second step is to make death not really about death and to not get comfortable. Because what's essential is not what you believe happens after a person dies, whatever that means for you. What matters is what you decide to do today and tomorrow, and how those actions and decisions will impact your life and the lives of people around you. As such an individualized society, we sometimes forget how intimately our lives are linked together. Whether we set out to or not, we all affect the world, and not one of us will leave it unchanged. So when I say make death not really about death, what I mean is think about how your actions and decisions will affect your children after you're gone, or the people who will live in your neighborhood 50 or 100 years from now, or the public health field, or that grassroots organization that doesn't exist yet, but that you've been thinking about starting. You will live on. What do you want that legacy to look like? I want to share with you the moment that catalyzed the idea for this step. About halfway through my first year at Phillips Exeter Academy, a large boarding high school in New Hampshire, a young man in the year above me passed away in his sleep. I didn't know him, but I decided to go to his wake, partly out of my well-established morbid curiosity, but more so because he was a part of this tight-knit community that I had just been accepted into. It was the first time I had ever seen a deceased person, and it was not like I had imagined. It was unimaginable. His parents talked about how much he had wanted to go there and how much he loved it there. He, like me, had worked very hard to get to that place, but suddenly it was taken away from him, and him from it. I wept, because he was me. I understood how much it could have meant to him to go to Exeter and to be a part of that community. When this young man died, I realized I couldn't get comfortable. What if I died tomorrow? How would people remember me? Would people remember me? Later I found out that this young man had an undetected heart abnormality. So realistically, he had no way of knowing that he wouldn't wake up. But neither do I. In a poem called When Death Comes, Mary Oliver says, "I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. It's easy to say, oh well, there's always tomorrow, so I'll just put that off. Or to think, oh well, I have the rest of my life to do that. But our whole lives consist of each one of those tomorrows. There's no guarantee that any of us will wake up in the morning. So why not choose to live in a way so that we're never left feeling like words went unsaid and actions went undone? By reflecting on mortality, something we all share, we can more clearly see how the fact of death connects us and can even inspire us. So don't get too comfortable. All right, so you've thought about mortality more. You thought about what kind of legacy you're leaving in the world. The third and final step toward reimagining death is to spend more time talking about it. Whenever I have a deadline for something and I complain about it to my dad, he likes to joke with me that he's working under a deadline too, except he means it in the most literal sense. But my dad doesn't always like to joke about death. Both of my parents are getting older now, and the possibility of losing them is becoming more and more real. And they know that too. I know that some days they're more afraid of dying than others, and I know what they think will happen at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Being the 9-year-old that already imagined a life without them, I was curious what they actually thought about mortality. So I asked them, and I continue to ask them. Sometimes they talk about it with the assurance of a Zen master, and other times they humble me with their feelings of helplessness in the face of the unknown. Can you ask the people in your life these questions? Maybe they want to talk about these things, but they've just never been asked. It's never too soon to talk about death. No one has to be gravely ill for it to be a valuable conversation. We might feel more comfortable talking about the end of life with elderly individuals, but We should feel comfortable talking about it with children and young adults too, because death is something that will appear and reappear throughout our lives, and in many different guises. James Baldwin once wrote, "Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives, will imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, mosques, steeples, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, the only fact we have." It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide, indeed, to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. How we understand mortality determines so much of how we behave and what choices we make. If we're talking about American culture, what does it mean in our specific context to avoid talking about it? Perhaps, as Baldwin surmised, it means that we don't live in the world with enough passion, with enough intention. How we conduct ourselves in the world changes when we reimagine our concept of mortality. If people thought about mortality more, didn't get too comfortable or complacent, and talked about death with people more, then every day could be imbued with a new sense of immediacy, a new kind of compassion, and a different kind of connection with others. It does not matter whether you accept it, reject it, celebrate it, or try to run from it. Living things die, all of us included. I invite you to reimagine your relationship with death so that whenever that time comes, you will have graced the world with so much more than just a visit. Thank you.